First off, I got to say I'm honored to even be up here. When I was asked by Josh to do this, I thought, me? Are you sure you want me to do this? Because I'm probably the least qualified person to probably be on this stage to stand next to some of the heights of men like Justin Gibney and women like Lisa Fields. But I'm absolutely honored to be here. I think this is an amazing thing that's happening. I don't plan on really stimulating your intellectualism in the short time I have with you, but I do pray that what I say has an opportunity to pierce you in your hearts. Psalm 23 is one that most of us are very familiar with. I grew up in a little small town. I went to a little small church, St. John Missionary Baptist Church, and in Sunday school we learned Psalm 23. And this morning I want to have an opportunity to kind of share that and then talk from the subject, prepare the table. Prepare the table. Psalm 23, starting at verse 1, it says, "The Lord is my shepherd." That gives us relationship. He says, "I shall not want," which tells us supply. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, which is rest. He leadeth me beside the still waters," which shows us refreshing. "He restoreth my soul," which shows us healing, the restoration process of the gospel. "He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness," which showed us guidance for his name's sake, which gives each and every person in here purpose. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," which shows us testing. So "I will fear no evil," which tells us about protection. "For thou art with me," that's faithfulness. "Thy rod and thy staff, they shall comfort me," that's discipline. Particularly here in verse 5, it says, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies." That's hope. "Thou anointest my head with oil." It's consecration. "My cup runneth over," in abundance. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." It says, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever," which tells us about security. You know, when I was young and I read Psalm 23, I didn't really understand the height and the depth of it. As I got older and I started going to church, I would hear Psalm 23 being preached. And when we got to that part in verse 5, when it says, "He prepares a table before me in the presence of mine enemies," the way in which it was presented at times was that it was almost a table that would be used for gloating. That God would prepare a table in the presence of the enemies so that the enemies can see what God has done in your life. But I ask us to think in a different way. The table in many ways symbolizes hope. It symbolizes reconciliation. It's a place where people gather together. I mean, over a meal. Treaties have been signed over the table. Many of us, a fixture in our homes is either the dining room table or the breakfast nook. It's that place where we come together to sit down. The table shows us how rich we are when we can have all of our family to join us there. It also can show us just how impoverished we are when no one is there to eat with us. The table. You know, I was asked years ago. I'm a pastor of a church here in Sandy Springs, and we've been pastoring now for about 7 years. It was 7 years in January. And I was asked a couple years ago, you know, "Cornelius, what are you doing to make your church multiracial, multicultural, multi-generational?" And, you know, I lean onto the subject, "Unless the Lord builds the house," because I'm sorry, I'm black, so I don't know if you don't feel comfortable coming. But I think that's mostly on you. I don't know what else to tell you. But in my time of prayer, I was convicted because I had to ask myself, is my concern mostly to make my church multicultural and multiracial and multi-generational? Or should my concern be to make my life that way? Because my prayer is that my church would begin to mimic my life. And I was deeply concerned about this because the house, the place where people come to in the church There should be a place where they should be comfortable. But I had to ask myself the question, could somebody who did not look like me, could somebody who did not talk like me, could somebody who did not come where I come from, could they come inside of my home and sit at my table and feel comfortable? I know we can sit together in rooms like this, but my question is, could somebody who doesn't look like you, who doesn't talk like you, who doesn't come from where you come from, could that person stand around you while you talk to your coworkers and still feel comfortable around you? Can that person go to your private clubs? Can that person hang out with you and still feel comfortable? Can that person hear your private conversations and still feel comfortable being around you? So I don't know if so much of our conversation is to make our church multiracial, our church multicultural, but now I put the mirror up in our faces and I ask myself the question, is that the way my life is? I had to ask myself some questions. Would people who didn't look like me, who didn't talk like me, would they feel comfortable at my family gatherings? Or would I even be invited to theirs? I know I can come to your church, but would you ever invite me to come sit down at your dinner table? I'm a young guy, I'm a 32-year-old kid. I like saying that. I'm not in a rush to be older. I have a beautiful family. I believe they have a picture of them in the back they're going to put up for me. I have a beautiful family. I have a 1-year-old Roman who I'm holding. I have a 4-year-old Taylor, and I have a 6-year-old son who looks just like me and acts like me, which is a terrible combination. And I have a beautiful wife, you see there. And I wanted to show you that picture because where I come from a little small town in Mississippi. If you've driven down I-20, you probably passed right by it and even recognize it. It's the Newton, Philadelphia exit. I'm from a little small town called Newton, Mississippi. It's about 28 minutes or so from Meridian. It's about 49 minutes or so away from Jackson. In that little small town, about 400 people, I grew up in a double-wide trailer. I grew up 7 miles away from the nearest grocery store. And where I grew up, my mom, my dad, amazing people. I woke up, where I grew up, I woke up on Saturday mornings, and Saturday mornings was about going out and cutting the grass. I didn't know really what segregation looked like. You would think in the late 80s, early 90s, you would think that stuff would have been almost done away with. But where I lived, there were the black folk, and then the white folk lived in the big gate in the town. They owned the bank and the hospital and the dentistry office, and they were optometrists. They owned it all. And I didn't really know what that looked like. A mile and a half from where I grew up, that's where the Ku Klux Klan would meet to burn a cross. And I didn't really know what all that looked like as a child. In 1999, going into year 2000, when many of you were probably thinking about what kind of plans you're going to make, what party you're going to go to, and what the exciting thing was going to be, there was a saying going around Newton. It said that if a black person was found after midnight, that black person would be found and they would be shot on sight. My mom showed such tenacity, such strength. She put us in the car. She said, we're going to watch night service. We drove from Newton, Mississippi. We drove to Decatur, Mississippi, to Decatur Missionary Baptist Church. We went to watch night service. After we got finished at watch night service, it was past midnight. On the drive home down those dark roads, I was terrified because every time I saw a car and I saw headlights, I thought it was a white person that may stop us to kill us. And we drove back home, and it was in those times that this whole conversation just started for me. I remember being in Newton Elementary School, and a little white boy looked at me and he said I was a nigger boy. Those things happen. I'm not far removed from that. And it created such anger and such animosity in my heart towards white people. And lo and behold, God has a way of bringing things full circle, doesn't he? He has a way of bringing healing in ways in which we didn't even know. I meet my wife. I'm a southern boy from Mississippi. My wife is a northern girl from Michigan. She grew up on a farm, but something interesting about her, she's born from a white mother and a black father. Her mother is Beverly Hills white. Her daddy is Alabama black. They got together, had a kid. Parents didn't like that too much. They put her up for adoption. And after she was put up for adoption, she was adopted by a white family, a white mom and a white dad. Her mom adopted 23 other kids. She adopted all the kids nobody else wanted. Most of my wife's brothers and sisters are disabled, stuck in wheelchairs, can't talk, can't walk, kids who were thrown outside of windows, crack babies. And when I met my wife, she told me, she said, I want you to meet my family. No, I don't think that's a good idea. I walk inside of my mother-in-law's house. Before she can even say anything, she grabbed me and she hugged me and she said, I love you. And I looked at my wife and I said, this woman don't know me. I'm a crazy black man. She don't know me. And she continued to explain her love for people, and I continued to see it. But it wasn't until that Thanksgiving evening when we sat down at the dinner table, and I looked around at the different ethnicities. I looked around at the different cultures. I looked around at the different people sitting around that table. I mean, there were so many people, they had put tables together. I looked around at that table, and in that moment, God began to pierce my heart. Because he began to show me that as I sat down to just eat a meal at a table that was prepared, there was a place where healing could happen. Something so simple as just a table. And it was very important to me because the people who were sitting across from me, I thought were my enemies. And could it have been that the table that was prepared before me was not for gloating, but a table meant for reconciliation? A place where I could go and sit and to be reconciled with people who did not look like me, who did not talk like me, who did not walk with me, who didn't walk like me, but who were different than me, but allowed for me to see something, that no matter who I was or who they were, we all had something in common. And we all had commonalities that brought us together. And if I was to only heighten our differences, then it only separated us more. But it was a simple thing. It was a simple thing. And that was just what I was able to have at the table. That table that's in your house right now, it represents conversation. That table, the simple thing, the table in your house right now, it represents communication. That table in your house right now, it represents discipline. It's at the dinner table where I'm able to look at my kids and say, we don't do that. We don't talk like that. We don't say those kind of things. It's at the dinner table where my wife and I, we ask our kids, what is the peak and pit of your day? Tell us how you feel. Tell us what's going on inside of your mind. Tell us what's going on with you. It's at that dinner table where there's an exchange that happens. And if we don't take the time to do the simple thing of preparing the table for other people who don't look like us to come and sit at that table, then we can get all the information that we need about what has happened, but we go back to our homes, to our comfortable places, and we don't make things happen. Because one of the things I also know is that the table represents family. And if we are all truly one race, if we're all truly one people, if we're all truly called by one spirit, by one hope, if we're all truly one hope, just one church, can we just be, if all we're going to be is just satisfied with sitting next to each other in public, then I dare to think how far we're going to actually get in this conversation. Because we're going to have to do the hard thing. The easy thing is standing on this stage and talking about reconciliation. The easy thing is showing up to things like this and saying, I can be a part of the conversation. The easy thing is going back home and saying, I heard some good stuff. The easy thing is reading the book. The easy thing is reading the podcast. But it's the hard thing. The hard thing is when you have your barbecue to invite somebody there who does not look like you. That's the hard thing. The hard thing is over Thanksgiving holiday, when you have prepared your table to put out a couple extra settings for people who don't look like you. The hard thing is over Christmas time, when you sit around that table, is to invite somebody who does not look like you. That's the hard thing. The hard thing is to take somebody to lunch so you can listen to them. That's the hard thing. That's the hard thing. And we can all do that. No matter our age, no matter where we're from, no matter our cultural differences, we can all do that. I have been all over the world, and one of the things that I see that brings us all together in unity is the table. Whether I'm in Africa, and they got some good food in Africa. The table brought us together. It allowed for me to see how much more we had in common than what we didn't. And I'm in the United Kingdom, I'm in London, and I'm in other places. The table brings us together with the British, who don't look like me and don't talk like me. But it shows us just how much more we have in common. When I'm in the Middle East and I'm sitting in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and I'm sitting around people who don't look like me, who don't think like me, it's the table. It's the table that shows me that's the love of God that brings a man to repentance. And if I'm to be a conduit and a vehicle to help somebody to see the love of God, then I must be that person to first engage them with love. And I must engage them at a place that is simple as the table. The table that's been prepared is a table of family. It's a table we can sit down and we can have conversation, we can have communication, but it's a simple thing. You know, I come to things like this and I always think, what can I do to further the cause? You know, my wife, super outgoing. I mean, you grew up in a house and you have 23 brothers and sisters. I grew up in a house, it was just me and my older sister, and we didn't get along until we were older. So it was easy for me to just kind of have my own thing. I had my own room, I had my own stuff. Don't come in, don't bother me. Don't interrupt my life. Don't make me uncomfortable. Don't do anything to bother me. But my wife, we get married, and my wife, she looks at me and she says, we should do a Friendsgiving. I said, what in the world is a Friendsgiving? I'm not doing no Friendsgiving. That doesn't even make sense. I'm not doing no Friendsgiving. She said, no. She said, we're going to make friends. Well, I don't like that either. I feel like I got enough of them. I got about 3 good ones, and that's all I really need. 2 of them are iffy. 1 of them I know solid. So we're going to have a Friendsgiving. So here she goes. She gets ready to cook. And the cool thing about my wife, man, my wife is vegan. So you talk about sitting at a table with somebody who's different than you. I'm what you call vegan plus. No, hear me out. So I'm strictly vegan plus chicken and some other things, beef and everything. So I'm vegan plus. And so my wife, she, you know, on holidays and even during the week, every day, you know, it's a vegan section, and then there's the meat section. And my son, me and my oldest son, we always eat from the meat section, and my wife and my daughter, they eat from the vegan section. And but you know, we have our Friendsgiving, and you know, every year, even on Sundays after church, somebody comes through our doors and they may not look like us. As pastors, in the Bible I read, it tells us to be hospitable. So we invite them to our house. Hey, what you doing right after church? We're going to go get something to eat. Well, you might as well just come over to our house and eat with us. Well, we got kids, or we do too. They just mess up the house together. After they get finished, we'll all just clean it up together. Just come on over. Bring your kids. Well, I don't know where you come from. I don't know where you come from either, but that's what the dinner table is all about. And we're going to prepare a table so that we can learn about each other. So you can see that we have a lot more in common than you may think. This is just a simple thing. My encouragement here is while we have our minds stimulated, while we may learn a lot of stuff, I hope that you create some traditions in your own household where you begin to open up your doors to people who don't look like you. Invite them into your house. They say, what are you coming for? Come get a plate. Come eat. You know, I find it very interesting that nowadays, due to social media, we know more about people on the other side of the world than we do the people who live right next to us. And I'm afraid that our social media is making us less social because we feel like we know people who we have not met. I got a handwritten letter the other day and I thought, what stone age are they living in? Send me a text message. But it reminded me of the personal touch that comes from the pen in hand to the paper. And it further reminds me of the personal touch that happens when you can sit down at a table and you can exchange a meal, you can exchange conversation, and you can talk. I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but I'm saying it's a needed thing. Our politics may be different, but can we be mature enough to sit down at the table and talk about them together? Some of our theology may be different, but can we find some commonality at the table? So the only thing I say here is, if God definitely prepares a table before us in the presence of our enemies, I question whether or not if the table should be used for us to talk about what God has just done for us, but for us to have an opportunity to say, let's be reconciled. For us to be able to exchange at that table the gospel message, the pure gospel message, but not just to preach the gospel message, but to showcase it in our lives. So, I ask you, would you prepare that table? Would you open up your world? Would you open up your horizon? Will you set some new traditions inside of your house and reach out to people who don't look like you, who don't talk like you, who don't think like you, so that we can begin to make progress, even if it is just one person at a time? Because that one person, believe it or not, could go and touch millions. One person at a time, one conversation at a time, and one meal at a time. Thank y'all so much.